There's blood all over there. There was no stopping it. It just kept pumping out.
Bob, I really need you to calm down. The ambulance is on its way to the hospital. There's nothing you or I can do for Norm right now. We have to focus on our other responsibilities.
Norm's arm was in the tail pulley, but his body was lying over by the emergency pull cord. The paramedics must have taken it with them because it just isn't there anymore.
Listen to me, Bob. The Ministry of Labor is going to be here in an hour. I need you to get me copies of all the procedures for the conveyor, including the lockout procedure. I need inspection reports. I need training records.
He isn't gonna make it, Jack. I know he isn't. His face was gray and his eyes were open, but he wasn't seeing it.
Okay, enough,
I'm trying
Bob,
to talk to him.
Enough! We're in the middle of a crisis here. I need you and Sandra to gather up the necessary documents. Have you secured the site? The site has to be secured for the inspector. Bob, take a couple of minutes and gather yourself, okay? Can you do that for me?
I'll do it, Jack. Okay. His wife is expecting a baby. What do we tell his wife?
I know. Shelley tried to call her when the ambulance is on its way to the hospital, but nobody answered. Do you know another number where we could reach her?
She volunteers a couple of hours a week at his daughter's daycare.
Okay. I'll have Shelley track down the number for the daycare. You know, this is...
I can't believe it, Jack.
It's like a bad dream. Okay, Bob, when you and Sandra have got those documents together and secured the site, let me know, okay? I'm counting on you.
Jack and Bob are in the early stages of a workplace nightmare. Co-workers are in shock, family members have yet to be informed, and nobody knows exactly what happened and why. As for Norm, he'll be pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. This terrible scene plays itself out over and over again in Ontario workplaces every year. Only the names and the circumstances change. The same shock waves ripple through the workplace and the families of all the employees. Some companies never fully recover from the emotional and financial trauma. The saddest part of it is that it doesn't have to be this way. These types of incidents don't have to happen at all. For many of us, driving to and from work is the most dangerous part of our workday. But for those of us who work around powerful machines and industrial processes, the risk is ever present and the stakes are high. We can never entirely eliminate risk from the work that we do, but we can identify, assess, and control the risk. In the days to come, Jack, Bob, and others will conduct a thorough risk assessment of the conveyor as part of their incident investigation. Everyone will look closely for gaps in the company's health and safety program and procedures that might have contributed to Norm's death. There are really only two options when it comes to conducting a risk assessment in your workplace. You can plan it and do it in a calm and deliberate manner, involving all of the right people and strengthening your internal responsibility system in the process, or you can conduct it out of the blue, in a state of shock and panic after something terrible has happened. Proactive or reactive? The choice is up to you. You're about to see the proactive version of this story. Nothing has gone wrong yet. A risk assessment of the discharge conveyor is being planned. The team is defining the scope of the assessment and the information they need to do it.
Good morning, good morning.
Hello. Hi, Bob.
How you doing? Welcome. Well, shall we begin?
I talked with Norm again this morning about following the lockout procedure for the conveyor. He says the procedure takes too long to do because of the number of times it has to be cleaned or adjusted.
The conveyor needs to be locked out every time someone works on it, Bob. That's the bottom line. It's non-negotiable.
I know, Sandra, and that's what I tell the guys.
Sandra's right about locking out, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that that conveyor is in optimal working condition. Ron, what are you hearing?
You have to understand where Norm's coming from here, Jack. On the one hand, the supervisors are always pushing production. On the other hand, they tell us we have to stop everything and lock out every time we need to clean the return roller or dress the belt.
Well, Bob, you're the risk assessment facilitator. I mean, what's your read on all of this?
I think Norm and I need to look at everything, including operating procedures and maintenance records. If we can cut down the number of times the conveyor needs to be shut down and locked out, that would really help.
Sandra?
Bob and I spoke about this earlier, and it's the right way to go. But we also need to be sure that everyone understands how important it is to lock out every time.
Okay, let's do it.
How do you conduct an effective risk assessment? You think safe. You see the hazards. You assess the risks. You fix the problems by controlling the hazards. And then you evaluate the controls by continuously monitoring and improving them. You calculate risk by measuring the likelihood of injury and harm as a result of the hazards you identify. Then you determine the potential consequences if any of the identified hazards were to cause an incident. The right people have been involved in the planning of the risk assessment of the conveyor area. The team has clarified the scope of the assessment. Now Bob and Norm are getting down to the business of assessing risk.
Well, the main problem, as far as I'm concerned, is the stuff keeps getting caught in the return roller. Now, if there was some way of...
Where's the guard, Norm?
It's there. Tail pulley, the head pulley are both guarded.
No, I mean here.
Oh, that one. I got damaged a couple weeks back. I guess it's still being rebuilt. I'll tell you one thing, Bob. It's been a heck of a lot easier clearing debris from that return roller with the guard off.
You don't do that while a conveyor's running, do you?
A few times, but just a quick in, quick out with the pry bar.
Would you say that's a risk?
Nothing's ever happened.
What could happen, do you think?
Could happen? Well, I guess my glove or my shirt cuff could get caught in the return roller.
Is that a risk?
Well, the emergency cord is right here if anything goes wrong.
I hear you, Norm, but a risk isn't something that actually goes wrong. A risk is something that could go wrong. What would happen if your arm got caught in the return roller and you couldn't reach the pull cord?
Well, if you look at it that way, I guess it's a risk.
It's my responsibility to make sure that guard gets put back on right away, but it's your responsibility to make sure the conveyor is shut down and locked out before you do any cleaning or adjusting. If there's a technical problem with the return roller, we need to solve it.
Oh, you should talk to Derek in maintenance. He told me that there's this gadget you can get that automatically centers the return belt.
I'll definitely talk to him. What other risks have we got?
Oh, someone could trip over that pail.
Okay, what else?
Oh, tools are sometimes being left lying around. I mentioned it to Derek a while back, and he said he'd talk to the guys about it, but he's been pretty busy, new crew and everything. We need some kind of system to keep track of all this stuff, you know?
Bob and Norm are giving the entire conveyor area a going over. They are assessing hazard sources from the point of view of people, equipment, materials, environment, and processes. They are checking the adequacy and condition of the guards, including the head pulley and tail pulley guards. They're checking the emergency stop pull cord to make sure it's working. They are reviewing the way the belt is lubricated to make sure it is safe and effective. They are checking the loading points and discharge points, the walking surfaces and general housekeeping around the conveyor, and the availability and condition of tools, such as shovels, pry bars, and wrenches. Each hazard Bob and Norm identify is noted on the risk register. They then use the risk assessment matrix to rate the likelihood of an incident and the potential scale of the consequences. This helps them determine what new controls need to be put in place. The risk assessment team will then be in a position to decide the order of priority when they start implementing the new hazard controls. Bob and Norm have systematically identified hazards and assessed risk in the conveyor area. Bob is now ready to report back to the team with his findings and recommended controls. Each control will need to be examined by the team for functionality. Does it work? Is it practical? Can it be maintained and enforced? Survivability. Will it survive an incident? Reliability. How often will it work in an incident, and will it prevent or minimize an incident? Cost. Will it provide sufficient protection to justify the investment of time and money? And independence. Will it work independently of other systems, or will the failure of something else disable it? All of the recommended hazard controls will involve one or more of the following options. Elimination of the hazard, which is always the most effective control. Substitution by a less hazardous process, material, or equipment. Isolation of the hazard, which could include engineering controls. Administrative controls, such as stricter enforcement of safe operating procedures or personal protective equipment.
There's a fair bit of ground to cover in this risk assessment report, but we've got a couple of immediate priorities. One of them is to replace a guard that's been missing from the discharge conveyor for the past couple of weeks, and that's already been done. I should have caught this sooner, and I take responsibility for that. The other priority is to hold a safety meeting with the workers and re-emphasize the importance of following lockout procedures. Norm and others have been bypassing the lockout procedures to remove debris from the return roller. That's a very dangerous practice, and it has to stop before someone gets hurt or killed.
Well, let's get right on that, Bob. Now, you know I'm willing to participate in any of these safety meetings. But what about the point Ron made before about reducing the number of times the belt needs to be dressed or cleaned?
Well, Bob and I had Derek look at the belt tracking. Derek figures the belt would run a lot more reliably if we installed a return belt positioner that automatically funnels the belt into the centered position.
Norm is the one who first mentioned that idea to me.
Well, you know, it sounds promising, but how much is it going to cost?
We're working on that, Jack.
Okay, well, break it to me gently when you find out, okay? The bottom line is that the guys deserve to work with reliable equipment.
In fact, the Health and Safety Committee looked at the belt tracking problem last fall. But then everybody got busy for a few months and, well, the project got put on the back burner.
Well, let me assure you, it's on the front burner now. Bob, you know, this is a really nicely detailed report, and I want you to thank Norm for all the input. Now, our people put a lot on the line every day, and they need to know that we have their back.
I'll tell Norm we're working on a number of things.
Good. Now, let's work our way through these recommendations, okay? You say there is a problem with the tail pulley guard.
It's looser than it should be, probably due to all the vibration over the years. What Norm and I are recommending is that we replace the tail pulley.
The team has agreed on the high-risk priorities for action, and everyone is motivated to keep the momentum going. The action plan will list all the approved new hazard controls and the specific actions to be taken on each of them. The plan will also spell out who is responsible for implementing the new controls and the target date for completion. The risk assessment is starting to pay off.
Yeah, so we've got the guard back up. Good. Derek came by, put in
Once the new hazard controls are in place, 3/4 of the SAFE process of risk assessment is complete. The team has seen the hazards, assessed the risk, and fixed the problems. The final step in the risk assessment process, evaluate, never actually ends. This step involves the continuous monitoring of all controls. The point is to ensure that the controls are working as intended, that they haven't created any new hazards, and to look for ways of further improving them. It's at the evaluation stage of risk assessment that you can see how it strengthens your company's health and safety culture. Eventually, risk assessment becomes part of the day-to-day operations instead of a side issue, an afterthought, or worse, the reaction to a critical injury or death. Because risk is an everyday reality at your workplace, risk assessment needs to be an everyday reality. It all comes down to the two options I mentioned earlier. You could start your risk assessment process now, as part of your company's commitment to creating a strong and effective internal responsibility system, or you can wait until something terrible forces you to do it. Believe me, there's no time like now.
Hey, Jack, I was just coming to get you. Norm wants you to see the return belt positioner in action. He's so proud of it, you'd think he designed it himself.
Well, I hear it's working a lot more smoothly. Any problems?
None so far, but we're keeping a close eye on it.
Good. Why don't we go take a look at it?
By the way, Norm's wife is expecting a baby. You might want to mention that you heard about her.
Kidding. That's their second one, isn't it?
Yeah, he's hoping for a boy
Good
this
for
time.
him. I'll grab my coat.